Can you hear us?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Streaming live.
You can't
Our
see
meeting
us.
is now streaming live. Oh,
No.
That's a toy.
I know it's about the Tudors.
The Tudors in Burbage in Tudor time.
All right. When he speaks,
Yeah.
he switches out.
I can't quite hear what there's something about it now.
Remove it now. We could do it nearer us, really, couldn't we? But
You won't get in then, will you?
no, that's the trouble. No, leave it.
You won't be too in it, will it?
No, no. Oh, I see what you mean.
You'll bring it here.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah,
That's what's there.
yeah.
What do you drink?
oh, Maureen. Maureen and
I'm
David.
not far forward because this cushion's so huge.
Oh, yeah.
That's why I'm forward to
Irene and
you.
Carol.
You've got 2 cushions, have you?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Is that right?
No.
Ask him. Why you got your hat on, Bob?
Oh, I'm writing down.
He's a Tudor gentleman now, Trevor.
Oh, right. Okay. Oh, you are me. Tudor gent.
Tudor gentleman.
Does that mean he can move about freely?
Time traveller.
Yeah.
Do you know it's a year since we met now, isn't it?
Well,
Carol's here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yes,
Damn
it
it,
was because it's March now.
Yeah. When we had the guy from Nuneaton, didn't we? The last time we met.
Is that right?
There's Pam and Shirley.
All the shops.
I said, then come coffee. You said, no, John,
Yeah, I've renewed my subscription.
if we go down that road,
Yeah, I do too.
7 o'clock. Do you want to start then? 7 o'clock?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's 7:01.
We were comfortably. Did everybody get the notices on email?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, anyway, if you didn't, it'll back because I'll read it.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry to say I've got to start off with some sad news that Dennis Atwell's died.
Oh.
Remember Dennis, very good friends of Jean and David Woods, of course.
Dennis.
It's well, it's been 2 weeks on
Marina.
Saturday since he passed
Oh, he
away.
wasn't. They weren't members.
Yeah, they Jean, Dennis and Mavis, they went in the Willows care home last year. But Mavis is doing okay. She's in the home still. They're having a family funeral at Countersthorpe on the 22nd. So I'm going to pass our condolences to the family.
Yeah.
Right. War Memorial Centenary Commemoration. Thank you for all your kind thoughts, everything that you've come in touch with us with. It's been brilliant. And of course, special thanks thank all those who put it together. Paul, Anne did the script, Paul did all the technicals, Emma did a bit, Jeff, oh gosh, and then there were all the people who took part, of course. But it was, it was, I've never seen anything like it in Burbage. It was just brilliant, yeah. And thank you ever so much for that. It's really appreciated, and we felt that we've made it. We've really marked that centenary now. We're really important because we've missed so many things in this last year. So I'm glad we could do that. Another appeal. Again, I want information on the Wellington bomber crash, which was somewhere between Orchard Farm and Mickle Hill, off Lutterworth Road on the 10th of January 1943. Greg Rocher's interested in this. I don't really know who to ask now. I've asked 1 or 2 older people.
If you move a bit, then you can.
Sylvia, can I speak?
Yes.
Speak.
You listed it.
Yes.
I was
Oh, they
speaking
could-
to Shirley Hailstone on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Hinckley Archaeological Society.
Yeah.
And she said, if you're going to start searching, perhaps approach Hinckley Search Society
All right. Okay. Yeah.
Right.
rather than the archaeological to begin with.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, because we thought if there were any metal detectors about, I know Anne's had a word with the Archaeological Society anyway. They've suggested a few ideas. So that's as far as we've got with that. If anybody can think of any sort of older people who may know anything, let us know.
System that they're using.
I think it's going to be a difficult job though, because it was probably on the field somewhere. Right.
Still
Okay. Oh,
Yeah, can we ask everybody to mute, please, because you've got too much.
yeah, thank you. Right, okay. Right, number 4, the Zoom. We've got.
You just said, can I ask everybody to mute?
Right. It's just we got a bit of interruption while I was speaking. Right, number 4, the Zoom meet. We've got a Zoom meeting planned for Friday, the 26th of March, to commemorate the planting of the War Memorial Rose Garden. This was another significant day in the village. We've got photos with an account's been found in the press of the plate. It was a similar thing to the War Memorial commemoration, but not as full on, you know. But all the descendants, all the bereaved of the people on the War Memorial that had fallen, they all planted a rose. You're probably aware of the story of it because we put the information up about it, and so hopefully we're going to try and put some kind of presentation together for Friday the 26th of March. It'll be in the daytime, and we'll email you all with the contacts nearer the time. So hopefully we'll be able to put something together for that. Well, that'll be another one to look forward to. And the co-op are going to let us put another display up about the Rose Garden this time. The War Memorial display is still in the co-op funeral directors. If you want to have a look at it, it's there till Monday. I was supposed to collect it last Monday, but they asked us if we'd leave it another week because there's been so much interest in it. So we're going to do that. And of course, by the way, the War Memorial Centenary commemoration is still on YouTube. So we've got meetings program. Well, of course, as we know, our pathway out of lockdown. Hopefully, we'll start being able to think a bit more about when we can meet up again. Anyway, next for the time being, it's still Zoom. So you can see we've got 1st of April. We've got Paul Gardner from Hinckley District past and present. You know, a couple of years ago, he did a very good talk with his slideshow on the past and present, and he's going to carry on with that one. 6th of May, we've got the work of Leicestershire and Rutland Wildlife Trust with John Bristow. We booked him for last year, so he's quite happy to do a Zoom meeting as well. And 3rd of June, we've managed to get a speaker called Mark Temple. And it's on Stonywell and the Jimson family. If you remember, about I think it's nearly 5 years ago now, we went to Stonywell on a heritage visit. This is a different person. He's coming to talk about it. He's a professional speaker, so hopefully that will be interesting. We thought it was one of the few things that we'd all be interested in, and I think since it opened, it's gone from strength to strength, and I think there's a lot more exhibits there and that now as well. So I think that'll be an interesting talk. And then the 1st of July, if everything goes to plan, you never know, we might be able to get out for an outdoor meeting. So we're kicking around a few ideas for an outdoor meeting, and we'll let you know nearer the time what we can do about that one. So that brings us on to tonight's speaker, Joe Garner-Williams. It's quite a few years ago now. Joe came and had a talk to us. It was the night we did corn dollies. Do you remember? And no, I can't remember that. And Jo came and did a talk about the book that she's writing, the research that she's doing, which is an absolute epic, concise history of Burbage, up to is it First World War or is it the turn 1900? I can't remember.
1900.
1900 in the end, yeah. Which is the bits that we don't know about, of course. So so tonight Jo's going to do a talk on is it your favourite period, Jo, this, do you think?
I like this, but I also like the next one, which is the Stuarts,
Yeah.
the Civil War, really, because Burbage did get involved, families fighting families.
Yeah. So yeah, see, we don't know any of that, do we?
No.
So that's great. So I'd like to pass you over to Jo. So welcome, Jo. A wander
Thank you.
around Burbage in Tudor times.
Thanks. I should say my husband believes in DIY. If you look over my shoulder, you can see his wardrobe that hasn't got any doors on, and they've been waiting to go on there for about 5 years. But who knows? One of these nights we might do another one of these and we'll have doors, but if not.
Or you have to get Paul to show you how to do a clever background like his.
Well, I did try actually before we switched on, but it was all either space or it looked a bit like Hawaii. And I thought, no.
Anyway, it's all right. We can see how many clothes he's got now, can't we? He's got more than you.
Right.
Anyway, on to business. Right.
Yeah. Okay. I've never done a Zoom presentation before, so I hope I don't put you all to sleep, and I hope you don't mute me. Boredom or whatever. I'd like people to feel that they could interact. So if you want to put your hands up, then we can stop and yes, okay, Ruth. We can then ask questions and stuff like that rather than just plugging on and not knowing whether you're with me. As Sylvia said, I'm fascinated by the story of Burbage, and I've got many ancestors. Oh, shall I wait until they're in or out? Are we okay? I've got many traceable ancestors who came from Burbage, and us Garners go back to the late 1600s when Nicholas Garner married Mary Cheney. Mere newcomers, I realised, compared with the Forrians, for instance. But I never realised when I started researching Burbage just how much had happened here, and also in the locality, because the Midlands was it was the area where armies marched through, where things happened. So locally, there's an awful lot around us that's steeped in history. I'm also going to ask Jeff to do slides for me. So Jeff, could I just have slide number 1, please?
You can. There you go.
Thank you. So tonight I'm going to talk about Burbage in the time of the Tudors, and we're going to talk about its manorial lords, the Earls of Kent, and what life was probably like for the people who lived here and in the late 1500s. It wasn't the peaceful rural life that you might imagine. This is what Burbage might have looked like: thatched cottages lining the road through the village, and here we're looking north and we have the very brand new manor house on our right, and the homes of the cooks, the marshals and messengers on the left. If you'd like to take the slide off, Jeff, please, clear slide. I'd just like to say, because I know you lot, for sticklers to detail, you're probably going to pick up various spelling differences, but we are talking about over 400 years ago, and words do evolve. Also, I'm not going to stick to strict chronological order because it makes the tale easier to tell if I probably go on in a sequence that's not slightly clock driven. All the information, though, I can tell you, comes from documented records, which include the manorial records kept for the Grey family. They also include witness statements from the records of the Court of the Star Chamber in London, where our story ends up. So if we start our story, Jeff, could I have the slide, please?
There you go.
No, next one. Number 2. Henry Grey.
There
Right.
you go.
Let me introduce you to Henry Grey. Up until his 32nd birthday, he'd been somewhat unremarkable. Posh, but unremarkable. There are a lot of Henrys in this story, and I'm going to call him our Henry. Our Henry was born a second son in a time when his only hope for a comfortable future was either to marry an heiress or to join the clergy. Then out of the blue, his elder brother obligingly died, childless, the young age of 33, making our Henry the 6th Earl of Kent, the 9th Baron de Ruthyn, and the heir to a good fortune. Henry isn't looking his best here. It's a close-up of his alabaster effigy on a tomb monument shared with his wife. The Grey family seat was Rest Park in Bedfordshire, not the grand house it is now, but no doubt still impressive. Henry founded the mausoleum where he is entombed with his wife at Fletton, near to Rest, and he and many of his ancestors are buried there. It could be a good day out when we used to have days out. It's in Bedfordshire, so it's not that far. Along with the baronies of Kent and Ruthyn, Henry inherited Rest Park, properties in London, and hundreds of manors in Leicestershire, Bedfordshire, Norfolkshire, Warwickshire, Northamptonshire, and the Welsh borders. They all came into Henry's hands, including the manorial lordship of Burbage, which had been a Grey holding for over 170 years and would continue to be so until the 20th century, when the manorial holdings were largely abolished. Can you clear the slide, Jeff? At the time Henry came into the earldom, the Grey family was sitting fairly pretty, but this wasn't always the case. Henry's great-grandfather had a wayward son, Richard, who became the 3rd Earl of Kent and pretty much destroyed the family fortune and reputation. Could we have another slide, Jeff? Number 3. George Grey, the 2nd Earl of Kent, feared that his son would be a complete waster. Next one, that's it. Some rather nasty things said about Richard here. And George Grey altered his will because he thought that his son would just be unable to manage the earldom and his affairs. But although the lion's share was still entailed to Richard because of legalities, the old earl was able to assign many of his manors, Burbage being one of them, to his favoured son Henry by his second wife. George was our Henry's great-grandfather and also purchased the wardship of a young heiress for Henry to marry. Underage, fatherless heiresses were like gold dust, and they were often seized upon and adopted and sheltered, if I can use those terms, while their fortunes and bodies were managed by powerful men. But when the old earl died, Richard inherited, and as feared, earldom went to his head. He promptly kidnapped his brother's heiress, but was forced to give her up after an intervention by no less than Henry VII. Not surprisingly, she became a ward of the king. What goes round comes round. Richard was part of the Tudor court, and as you can see, he was the most spectacular failure. He lost much of his fortune there through gambling and his grandiose lifestyle. He was described as a spectacular failure, and courtiers much smarter than him took advantage, with the result that he mortgaged, leased, and sold off land. He is even said to have sold the same piece of land more than once to finance his lifestyle. Could you clear the slide, please, Jeff? Richard was part of the Tudor court, and lost much of his fortune through gambling and his grandiose lifestyle. He was described, oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. Richard turned up in France, this grandiose overspender. He turned up in France at the Field of the Cloth of Gold, which you probably remember through your history books. And he was sabre rattling with the rest of Henry VIII's court. His stallion was harnessed in gold and decorated in fringed Venetian velvet. In addition to his military retinue of knights, he took along 28 body servants and 2 priests. So that's really like having 28 butlers, basically, to go and stay in a tent in a field, which puts a whole new idea to glamping Tudor style. Rather fittingly, Richard died at the George Inn in Lombard Street, and what was left of the Grey estate went to his half-brother, our Henry's grandfather. Are you with me? Are all the Henrys making sense? Okay? Yep, thank you. Now, this Henry, who inherited very little, had lost his heiress to the crown, and his meagre inheritance was unable to support a peerage. So he never assumed the title of the 4th Earl, and he styled himself a modest Henry Grey Esquire, and later in life, Sir Henry Grey of Rest. But he worked tirelessly to restore the land sold off by the 3rd Earl. In our terms, it means that the land had been mortgaged, leased, and sold off. And in some cases, Richard, the dissolute Earl, had actually sold the same piece of land more than once. He was just completely nutty. But fortunately for Henry, this was the time of Henry VIII. We're moving through time, and the dissolution of the monasteries worked well for Henry Grey Esquire, and he was granted lands and manors by the crown, thus tilting the family religion away from Catholicism. Sadly, Henry Grey Esquire, or Sir Henry, as he styled himself by then, outlived his son, and so the Grey inheritance and the dormant earldom skipped the generation and went to the eldest of his 3 grandsons, Reginald. Can I have another slide? Number 4, please, Jeff. Reginald Grey, the 5th Earl, succeeded his grandfather when he was 22 years of age. And he immediately began to petition Queen Elizabeth I to restore the family honours, the earldom. And after 10 years of asking, his request was finally granted in 1572. However, the Grey earldom was regarded as lacklustre and decayed, and the family desperately boring. As you can see by this rather cheerless statement here. Sadly, Reg did not have much time to enjoy the honours, as he died childless, aged 33, a mere 1 year after being conferred with the title. Could you clear the slide, please? And so our Henry, the 6th Earl, succeeded to the honours of the Kent via a winding route of early deaths and childless heirs. I imagine him thinking, result, gone from being penniless to being the Earl. Could I have slide 5, please? But there's no such thing as a free lunch or earldom, and our Henry was selected by Elizabeth I to oversee the execution of Mary Queen of Scots. Here he is sitting on the scaffold at Fotheringhay Castle, Northants, where she was beheaded. And that actually is another good day out. The Fotheringhay Church is absolutely beautiful. And if anyone does wander over there, I live nearby, so you have to come for tea. But Henry rather messed up his role and was thought to have acted more harshly to the doomed Mary than was fitting for a man of his standing. He landed up at the sharp end of Elizabeth's wrath and promptly retired from court life to manage his estates. Had he hoped for a quiet life, he reckoned without his Burbage tenants. Could you clear the slide, please? When our Henry succeeded to the earldom, Tudor times were in full swing, and Elizabethan attitudes had enabled a golden age where able men were able to seize opportunities to improve their lot. This was the emergence of the gentry, people who'd be probably dressed a bit like Anne and Bob. Prosperous middle classes, upwardly ambitious working men made good. England was still an agrarian society. He who had land could have a good life. Much of the land was still in the hands of the crown or aristocratic families. But the Black Death and the resulting shortage of labourers, followed by the peasants' revolt, had effectively put an end to serfdom, and men were paid to labour. So by the time we get to the Tudors, many were able to lease or rent land on their own account. In 1852, our Henry, who is now the Earl, ordered a survey of Burbage. John Kendall, a local Burbage historian, translated the work some years ago from the original Latin, and it was a mammoth task. I studied his work and I realised that the scribe who did the survey had walked around the village and the fields and had described everything in detail. The problem is how he recorded the detail. Could we have a slide, please, Jim? Nope. Slide 6. Oh, yes, thank you. That's it. Thank you. Me going wrong. So if you'd like to read through that, you'll be incredibly thrilled, I hope, to realise that I'm not going to read through the whole survey in that same way. But what I did, I wrote all the descriptions, very similar to the one you see there, onto yellow Post-its. And then it became a sort of jigsaw puzzle to try to fit all the Post-its together to get them into the right sequence or a buttock. The yellow Post-its quickly overwhelmed my desk, and then the dining room table, and then took out most of the dining room floor. And the latter activity saw me crawling around on hands and knees, trying to put Post-its together in what was going to be the sequence of Burbage as it was in 1582. The dog, by the way, thought it was great and kept nicking bits of the Post-its. So could I have slide 7, please, Jeff? This is the result. It's not 100% accurate, but what is recognisable is the central shape and the road through Burbage. I was surprised that the majority of Gray's tenants had a goodish lifestyle. Most of the dwellings in the village stood on an acre or more of land. And the land, it wasn't gardens, it was land that was worked to provide food. Each house would have been surrounded by hens, pigeons, pigs, and livestock. Most were described as a cottage, or a tenement, or tent, or messuage, or barn. In reality, they were a crowded living space for people, for crops and food storage, cheese and milk production, animal shelters, and an abattoir, because you killed your own stuff in those days. And remember, no running water, no toilets, no bin men. It would have been right. Could I have number 8, please, Jeff? Right, if I just take you for a trot through here, if you look at the map again, I've just outlined some areas to make it easier to follow. If we start at the northern tip, you can see Park Lane, now Sapkett Road. And the name confirms the theory that the hunting park of the Hastings ran out from where the Manor Farm and the Manor House stand today, out towards the outwards, in fact. It went all the way over there. Spreading east, we've got Wood Lane, which you would now recognise as Hinckley Road. If we come down Wood Lane, you can see the church marked by the cross. The church would have been not the beautiful building it is today, something a lot smaller. But just above the church to the north, was in fact what they call the parsonage, vicarage as we would know it. And the vicar at that time was called Robert Spark, and he was known as a good preacher. Interestingly, there are a couple of fields that went with the parsonage, and they were called the hemp fields. So perhaps that's where he got his inspiration from, you know, for his speeches on Sunday. You can see Archer's Cottage just below the church, and that, of course, then was called the townhouse, and it was just that. It was used for town business. The manorial court met there. Gray's bailiff would have kept his records there. I fancy that the manorial court members, a jury or homage of 12, Gray's bailiff, various pounders and third brewers and clerks would all work from there. Just imagine the crutch of men in that little tiny top room. Somewhere in the area where Manor Farm stands today were the crumbling remains of the old mansion house left to deteriorate in the time of the Hastings. What we know as Aston Lane was then called Millers Lane, which you can see why I've noted the tannery, and that's the Aston Lane as you would know it now. It wasn't a conservation area at that time. It was definitely pungent. Where Burbage Hall now stands was a tannery owned by William Welsh. The common well and 2 pools were next to the tannery, and there is still a pond in the area today. Sylvia told me that a mass of animal bones were found around here, and that a tale had grown up about Cromwell's army staying overnight in Burbage en route to Naseby, and many animals had been slaughtered to feed his troops. It's very romantic, but is it right? The tannery might be a much more mundane but better explanation. Another surprise is that the old Grange was still just a twinkle in George Morris's eye. He leased the land the house stands on, and I suspect went on to build much of the house we recognise today. Not too much of a stretch, as the wooden beam inside is decorated with the initials GM 1608. The house known as 129 Church Street was a malt mill, a storage site for malted barley, and was tenanted by Richard Whiteman, Gray's bailiff or steward. And so we come to the Whitemans, the wealthiest family in the village. The family were prolific, and many were called Richard, Thomas, and Valentine. So it's very hard to trace who goes where in any family tree. But I'm going to stick to known facts. Thomas Whiteman lived in a grand house known as the Moat House, which stood in the area of the nursing home. I doubt that many of the inmates know that the name dates back over 400 years. Described as a bit of hat doffing, as he refers to Thomas as Mr. Thomas. And in fact, Mr. Thomas had married into local gentry, Purefoys of Caldecote Hall, just down the A5. Thomas was the son of Richard Whiteman, who I fancy built the original Moat House sometime around the 1550s. Richard had died in 1578, and his memorial is in the Burbage Church, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. So Thomas had become the head of the Whiteman family, and also the manorial lord of East Stoke, Nottinghamshire, where he had another grand house. Thomas appears at this time to have been splitting his time between Burbage and East Stoke. And the lease of the tenancy in chief for Burbage had passed on from Richard, his father, to his uncle George. The scribe notes that George Whiteman had recently built a grand messuage with glass windows. Now that's really posh in those times. And it was called the White House. Now I fancy the white was derived from Whiteman, and I think that the spelling became corrupted over time. But there's no doubt that this was the chief farm place of Burbage, and I suspect forms part of today's manor house. Mr. Valentine Whiteman lived in Sketchley, but I don't know where. Following on from the High Street to where the horse pool now stands was an area called the Town Waste, perhaps a hint of boggy ground, making it largely unusable, growing and grazing. At the corner of Windsor End Street and Malt Mill Lane, now Strutt Road, was a malt mill, the lease held by the Whitemans. They obviously had the beer concession for Burbage. Could I have slide 9, please? Surrounding the village were what were called the Great Fields of Burbage, Aldercar, Thor and Wheatmarsh. Each great field encompassed many smaller fields, and all are named in the survey. Jeff, could I have the next slide, please? Strange sounding names, some still familiar, but most lost to us. I think you should read through them yourselves. So passing on from some of those quickly, can we go to slide 11? Now this is the Great Aldercar Field, and it was done for the survey of 1852. And Aldercar was around 403 acres. And amazingly, it was divided into 844 lands or parcels, which were strips of land ranging in size from 2 acres to half a rood. Come on then, school days, anyone remember what a rood is? It's about a quarter of an acre. But think of allotments of strips of land. For instance, Rye Furlong there was 29 acres split into 76 separate landholdings, rented by 55 men. Some men held parcels in one field, and their parcels were scattered around the field. So whereas we might think, if for instance you held 10 parcels, they'd all be in a corner together in Rye Furlong, they were in fact scattered throughout. Some land parcels were sown, others were left for common land, grass swathe or tethered cattle. It was an organised chaos of sorts where men had to walk over the parcels of others to access their lands or beasts. All that land around Burbage, the 3 great fields, was owned by our Henry, Lord Grey, and the lion's share of the land parcels were leased to the Whitemans, Thomas and his uncle George, whose holdings were scattered across all the great fields. Could you clear the slide, please, Jeff? I hope that you get the picture of how precious land was to the Tudor tenants. It meant the difference between life and death. Everyone was busy all the time producing food. Land was precious, it kept you alive. And what we haven't mentioned is enclosure, and I'll sum it up as the great threat. Landowners throughout England had twigged to the fact that a field enclosed for sheep grazing was less labour intensive, easier to maintain, produced greater yields and increased land values. So throughout England, many manorial lords were throwing their multi-tenants off the land so enclosures could be formed. And enclosures sometimes were ditches all around, sometimes they were fences, and sometimes it was hedging, often hawthorn hedging. But the very mention of enclosure spread panic, and it is with this as a backdrop that we proceed to the Battle of the Smeenel. What follows is taken from the witness statements given at the Court of the Star Chamber in Westminster in the 1580s. So if I could have slide 12, please, Jeff. I have to introduce you. Now, it might look a bit like fancy dress costume, but it's going to help us, I hope, identify who was involved. So first of all, meet the posh boys. This is Thomas Whiteman and his brother-in-law, Francis Purefoy. So Thomas had done quite well. Like his father before him, he'd married into a family that had got a bit of aristocracy. So if we could have the next slide then, please. Now we've got the comfortably off farm boys. Well, we've got Thomas's uncle, George Whiteman, and we've got Valentine Whiteman, who I suspect was a nephew. And we've also got George's sons, Robert and Samuel. And if we could have slide 14, we now come to the opposition. And I've called these the rough boys, if you like, because we've got Henry Turville. Henry had recently inherited the manorial lordship from his father. The Turvilles turn up regularly throughout Burbage history, and they always claim to hold land through some deal or the other, and always cause trouble for the Greys or the Hastings, whoever is holding land at that time. And Turville had rather a motley crew of Aston men with him: Fidgin, White, Norris and Maston. Now, interestingly, it's claimed that all the guys of Turville's all came along armed with pike staffs for the battle, which is rather unusual. But then we think, in those times, people still had to turn out to support the monarch. So we're talking about people who were probably at some time marching along to support the king in various battles at that time, probably either in France or Scotland. But they'd obviously come back home and kept their pike staffs in case they had to turn out again. So if we could have slide 15, please, I'll tell you where the dispute took place. Do you recognise anything, anyone? The road at the top, running up to the Smeenel, is what we know as Sapcote Road. And the Smeenel is bordered to the south by the Aston Lane and Sapcote Road with Smithy Lane going off. You can't see it, it's out of picture, but it's still there. It's still unbuilt on, and you probably have driven past it and never noticed it. But why would you? However, the Smeenel and Westmead were in fact the cause of massive disputes and fights. Down here is the White House to the west, the southwest. And what you're looking at is, or was at one time, the Lord's Demesne land, Demesne being land that the Lord kept for himself. All that was being rented by George Whiteman, and he particularly was affected by what was happening in the Smeenel and Westmead. Can you clear the slide, please? For many years, both fields, the Smeenel and Westmead, had been used in common by the men of Burbage and Aston. Basically, it meant they'd used it for common ground, common wood taking, and they'd been sharing it. But the threat of enclosure had heightened tension. And in 1578, skirmishes had started between Aston and Burbage over wood and furze and grazing. I think furze at that time, unless anyone can enlighten me, was probably something like holly that they used to clip off and feed cattle with. unless anyone knows any better, I'll be happy about that one. Right. So what happened on this January morning, in the words of Henry Turville, is he saw a great congregation of men from Burbage turn up and begin to dig a long ditch around Westmead and the Smeagol, with the intention of enclosing the land for Burbage use. The Burbage gang was 48 strong and was urged on by William Sprigg, the village constable, and he could be heard shouting, "Fill your hose with stones to fight off resistance." Well, it would probably do it, wouldn't it? You think of socks filled with, well, Tudor stockings filled with stones. They'd be quite good to bash people with. The Forrians, the Messengers, the Watkins, the Robinsons, the Cooks, Morrises and Millers were all there, digging away. They'd even organised a lookout in the church tower to ring the alarm if men were seen coming from Aston. The result was a 5 foot wide and 3 foot deep ditch surrounding the Aston side of both fields, which meant that there was no way that the Aston men could get their cattle onto those two areas for grazing. The tension continued to mount, and spurred on by various raids of Aston men to carry off furs and wood. In fact, they were seen in one instance to be running off triumphantly, holding furs. Don't know how you do that really, but that was the claim. Henry Turville claimed that Westmead and the Smeagol were his, and this brought our Henry into the situation, claiming that they weren't. Then in January 1579, a far more serious incident occurred. Suffice to say, they all landed up in court. But what follows is taken from testimonies given by the Whiteman clan to the court of the Star Chamber in London. On the 21st of January, George Whiteman was pottering around the White House farm, looking to interest Valentine in buying a gelding, when word reached him that Aston men were cutting down firs in the Smeagol again. George shouted for his son Robert to go and stop them, and Valentine went along with Robert. Samuel, another of George's sons, was feeding calves near the Smeagol when he saw his cousin, Thomas Whiteman, and Francis Purefoy heading towards him. Thomas wanted to show Purefoy a mare and some calves. Then Samuel heard shouting and rushed to see what was happening, and he saw his brother yelling at the Aston men, "Go home!" I'm sure he said more than that, but "Go home, off you go." Suddenly, two Aston men, Maston and Norris, appeared armed with pike staffs. They jumped over the ditch and began to thrust their pikes at Purefoy. Francis ran off to get his walking staff, which he claimed, his words, he had left a little behind him. But Maston, the Aston man, chased after him with his pike. Thomas Whiteman then ran forward, holding nothing but his hat in his hand, and cried out to the Aston men to keep the peace in the name of her Queen's Majesty. Maston and Norris joined up again and started lunging at Thomas Whiteman. Well, you would, wouldn't you? You know, chief antagonist. It was then that Robert leapt into the frame to help his brother, to help his cousin. Suddenly, two more Aston men, Fidgeon and White, ran out of nowhere from the bushes, also brandishing pike staffs, and they set about Robert, who promptly fell into the ditch and was pinned down. With Robert down, Maston saw his chance and, roaring in anger, rushed at Thomas Whiteman, threw him to the ground, produced a dagger and tried to stab him. This brought Samuel Whiteman back into the fight, and he rushed to help Thomas. Robert, meanwhile, scrabbled out of the ditch, got away from Fidgeon and White, and hurled himself onto Maston, who he struck with many blows. Maston was now caught between Samuel, Robert, and Thomas Whiteman, and was overpowered. Meanwhile, Valentine had another go at Norris, Valentine with his walking staff, Norris with a long military pike staff, said to be 26 foot long. Now, you know, when you first think about a 26-foot long pike, it sounds a bit formidable. But if you're in hand-to-hand combat, you just start wondering, all you've got to do really is just jump to one side of the pike staff and then run up it. Well, that's what you'd have thought. So Valentine's there, and he did just that. He sidestepped the pike and closed with Norris. Norris drew a dagger and tried to stab Valentine. Fortunately, Purefoy, having regained his staff, rushed back into the fray and battered away at Norris. So they're all having a go at each other. Could you put the slide on, please, Jeff? 16. The noise of the commotion attracted groups of men from Burbage and Aston, and they all rushed to see what was happening. Fights broke out between the spectators, and for a time there was a right old free-for-all, watched by old Watkin of Burbage, who was handed a seized pike and dagger for safekeeping. The brawl continued for a time, fading out as the protagonists began to tire. Two Burbage men, Big and Gamble, were said to have been dangerously wounded. During the lull in the fighting, Figgin challenged Thomas Whiteman to a duel, while Norris, having recovered his breath from the beating he took from Purefoy, overpowered old Watkin and took back his weapons. He charged at Valentine again, but Valentine put up a stout defence, and Norris slumped to the ground, crying, "I am slain." You clear the slide for me, please, Jeff. Purefoy accused Norris of causing the fight, and this brought about a remarkable recovery as Norris leapt up and challenged Purefoy, saying, "If you're a man, throw away thy staff and throw daggers with me." Ooh. Norris held up his dagger by its point and made to throw it at Purefoy, who countered, and this is really macho, "If thou throw right. Otherwise, I'm coming to get you," basically. And his words had the effect of staying Norris's hand. Taunts were exchanged, and a bit more pike and staff waving ensued, but the fight had gone out of the Aston men, leaving the Whitemans victorious. And thus the battle for the Smeenel ended, but leaving many battered and bloody. The description of the fight in the Smeenel is taken from witness statements given at the court of the Star Chamber. The depositions, the witness statements of the Aston men, describe the same scenario very differently, but sadly, the deposition of the Aston men, they're not all intact. They don't, so I had to use the Whiteman set of the story. But there's no doubt that there was an altercation in which several men were wounded. And I leave it to you to decide who you think had the right of it with the Battle of the Smeenel. 10 years of court cases followed between our Henry Grey and Henry Turville over the ownership of the land. Verdicts came and went and were largely ignored by the losing side. It seems amazing. On the first hearing, it was decided that Henry Turville owned the land and Grey just ignored it. So on a subsequent hearing, it was then decided that perhaps Henry Turville didn't own the land. And that went on for 10 years, with the lawyers getting exceptionally rich. However, our Henry was a real lord and Turville a mere manorial lord. And you can guess who had the victory. But the upshot of it is that the Burbage Manorial Court was investigated, and the Whitemans appear to have been involved in a few underhand deals, land deals, and this branch of the Whiteman family largely moved away from Burbage about 30 years later. As a result of the manorial court failings, Henry decided to reorganise his lands and forced his tenants to move on to consolidated, enclosed parcels of land. In fact, over 900 acres of land were enclosed in Burbage, leaving, I think, something like 19 not enclosed. And many tenants moved away, had to go and try and find work elsewhere. At one time, because of the unpopularity of the enclosure brought about by Henry, a number of Burbage tenants got together and in fact sued Henry, which was quite phenomenal for those days, that ordinary men would dare to have such cheek to do that. So if Henry had wanted a quiet life after his experience with Mary Queen of Scots, he certainly didn't get it from Burbage, and they very courageously pursued him through the courts and even got together to actually have a fighting fund so that they could afford to hire lawyers. But that really is another story. And I hope that as you drive past the Smeagol next time, you'll think of all that ensued in Tudor times. And that's the end of my little tale for tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. Do you have any questions? Do you have any questions, anybody?
Any questions?
Yeah, Anne?
Do another one. Oh,
Yeah, we can just carry on.
very good.
Yes,
I
Joe,
hope yeah.
is there any existence of the ditch that was dug there?
That's just what I'm going to ask, yeah.
You know, I don't know. It would be interesting, wouldn't it, to go and have a look
Yes.
at this Smeagol, which does look largely untouched. You know, if you look at Google Earth, you can actually see the shape of it.
Yeah.
So it might well be. Who knows?
Yeah, we drove past there only this week.
Oh
Yes,
yeah.
we drove down there. Yeah. That's fascinating, Joe.
I seem to have a.
Oh, sorry.
No, there you go. We've just got a notice come up. Go on. Sorry, Anne.
You're saying about land, how important it is. At the museum, but well, last year, of course we weren't open, but I'd done a display regarding the disputes between the Greys
Yes.
and the Hastings. But I took the period and the troubles between the two families, and I took the period between 1485 and 1553, and it was another Henry Grey who lost his head because of his opposition to Queen Mary Tudor.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, that was Lady Jane Grey. That was another branch of the family. Lady Jane Grey.
Oh, sorry, I'm with you now. Yes, it was. It was her father. Yes.
Yeah, her father. Yes. I mean, she obviously was executed as well.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating to again, it was all about land.
It is.
Disputes between the Hastings and the Greys. It was all about land in this area. I was just concentrating on Leicestershire. Yeah.
Yes. And interestingly, those two families, when you move into the Civil War, they become absolute.
Yeah.
Take a minute.
Yeah, they were obviously on opposing sides, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah, that next period. Yeah.
Yeah. I have to say the Greys are probably very boring. They were staunch Protestants. You know, and they didn't really. I just think they were the Cromwellian lot. You know, they were holier than thou for much of their existence, I think. And the Vicar of Burbage was.
I was going to say a little bit later. We've got Anthony, haven't we?
Yes, we have.
Was he about the ninth Earl?
Yes,
Or-
he is.
Yeah,
Yes.
became the ninth Earl, because he was the
He inherited when he was 82.
I was intrigued, Joe, that you mentioned the Whitemans marrying into the Purefoy family.
Yeah.
Well, Anthony Gray also did.
Yes, he did. Magdalene. Yes.
Yeah.
It was the same family.
Was it? Yeah.
It was the same family, the Purefoys of Caldicot. Yes, just a different generation. Yeah. They obviously were a respectable family that they didn't have to go too far for. But
according to Google, furs is gorse.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Oh, wonderful. Thank you. So,
It's not like, don't blame me. It's Mr. Google's fault.
No, thank you. That's
It's
good.
a bit prickly stuff to carry off, isn't it?
They carried off everything in those days. You know, nothing was
How
wasted.
would they carry that? It's like you can hardly touch it.
They probably used it in buildings for surroundings and
Bottle and daub, I suppose. Oh, no.
possibly, you know, just they never wasted anything. They just couldn't afford to.
So were the Whitemans at Wykin, were they related to the Whitemans in Burbage?
Yes, they were. If you go back a couple of generations, then it was William Whiteman in Wykin, and he was. They were definitely from the same family, but different generations. Of course, families were so prolific that you get all sorts of branches of families. And if you're aristocratic, I was quite amused to find that a junior line would be called a cadet line. And not the serious senior line, if you like. Yeah.
You mentioned about Moat House.
Yes.
In your map. Was it called Moat House at the time?
Yes, it was.
There was, up till the refurbishment a few years ago in Moat House, there was evidence of a garden moat, a decorative garden moat there.
Yes.
And I wonder if that was left over from back in the Tudor times.
It could well have been. I mean, the Whitemans were wealthy, and I think it would have been Richard Whiteman, the one who's commemorated in the church, Thomas's father, who probably built Moat House. And I thought it was incredible. It was a bit of a surprise to me when I was looking through some old documents that Moat House, the name Moat House came up. And I thought, well, you know, we've probably not known just how far back this name did go.
Yeah, Sylvia, I've got some photographs of the moat as it was before the refurbishment.
Oh, lovely.
If you want me to drop my folder in, I think I did it for an A level.
Oh yes, please.
Archaeology, and you maybe want to take a copy.
Yeah.
If you're interested, let me know.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I'd love to see it.
Yeah. I mean, when they were building the one that's there now, John McNaughton photographed quite a lot, didn't you? I've got 2 big volumes on what John did. And
all right.
I know at the time, well, it wasn't sort of known till after, but they found quite post holes and things like that of evidence of an earlier building, you know, for which would probably be from this 50 one.
I just took some photos. I did 4 kind of moat sites around Leicestershire.
Great.
For part of my A level.
So what with that and say John's brilliant account of them rebuilding, it would be lovely. Yes. And the actual moat, that there's still a bit that exists at the top, you know, running parallel with Grove Road, and as far as we know, that's what was there from oh God, what was his name? The guy died. Was it before Dye? The guy who rebuilt Moat House. It was an ornamental moat. It wasn't a water fill moat, but it was to keep the cattle out. So out of his lovely pleasure garden. So you can imagine a moat would be there before that.
I just wondered if it was on the footprint of the old moat, you know.
Well, the only thing we've got is from Nichols' 1780 odd engraving of it, which it was there then. The top piece, you can definitely see the same line of it being there then. Yeah.
Well, I'll drop the photos into you sometime when I can find the folder, and then you know, if you're interested in photocopying them, please do.
Yeah, I'll scan them. Yeah, that'd be lovely. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
We've got a question from Ruth Susan Smith.
John Smith.
I was going to say, don't look like a Ruth.
You mute, John. John, you mute.
John, you need to unmute yourself.
That's a change. Keep him quiet. Oh, there we go.
Doing it now.
That's it. Cracked it.
No. Still can't hear you.
He's not unmuted it.
Yes.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Where's this ditch?
Oh yeah.
Where was it? I didn't understand where it was. This ditch they dug.
It was on the Smeenel, the field the Smeenel, where it borders with Aston Fanville lands.
Below Tallis's garage.
Yes, that's so. Yes.
Yeah, below there, so you're coming back towards Burbage, and then you've got your road off to Aston Flanville.
Yes.
It's that sort of triangular piece of land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Right, okay.
Yeah,
it's not where Aston Flanville, the manor house is.
No,
it's not there. The church.
I think we should have an expedition out actually to see if we can find the ditch.
Yeah.
It borders Sapford Road.
We'll go back to silent mode. Carry on.
We could probably do that, and I think there's probably a few tips there to learn. You know, with all these developers wanting to build around Burbage, perhaps we could all get us 26-foot park staffs and especially Bob and Anne could lead the charge in the concert.
Yeah.
Oh yes, let's get our sticks and our mics out.
Carry it in one hand.
So
BD developers really knows where.
All right.
Yeah. We've been doing that walk quite a bit in lockdown, haven't we? Yeah. And so it's a good place to go and have a look, and especially like Westmead, I didn't realise about that bit as well. So that's over the other side then, Joe.
It's just slightly further towards to the south, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, you've got the map. Yeah.
I've got the map. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can see where they are.
Yeah.
But it would be interesting. It was incredibly long. I think one of them was something like 480 yards long.
What, the ditch?
Yes, on one side. Yes. So it would have taken a good 50 men to actually bug it out.
Surely that would show up on Google Earth, wouldn't it?
I don't know.
I don't know whether they had that in 2 times, John.
I know there's bits of old railings bordering onto Sapcote Road, if I remember rightly.
Yes, they do. Yes.
So I'm just wondering which side of if there's a ditch there, which side they are.
No, it's the other side. It would be the Burbage, the Aston side, if you like.
Aston side, yeah. Bits there. Yeah, but that's it. Yeah, there's all these things we can look out for, and when you think all these names that come up, these old names, and yet we can spot things, the names that are around nowadays, aren't we?
34 Windsor Street.
Yeah.
Just before you go, Sylvia. Before you go, you went to see 34 Windsor Street inside to see how old it was.
Yeah.
What happened about that?
Right. Well, I've got to arrange another meeting with Adam Hinchcliffe, who's who's bought it. So I was supposed to go Sunday, but I was ill, so I couldn't meet him.
Right.
But they're putting down the concrete floors tomorrow.
Right.
That over the weekend, so it'll probably be a couple of weeks yet. But unfortunately, I've missed the footprint from what what they're probably going to cover up. But I'm hoping to get.
My son was there stripping it out at one point.
All right, yeah.
And he told me about that before you mentioned it to me.
Yeah.
I mentioned the thing. I just wonder what happened about it. So.
Yeah.
Did you take photographs and stuff?
I've not got many. No, I've only got a few.
No.
Because the builders won't obviously let you in for health and safety reasons.
No, they won't.
And best to go in at the weekends when Adam goes down and do that. But yeah, it looks interesting what they're doing anyway.
Right.
At least they're not pulling it down. Yeah. So
no, he's got a big budget for it.
Good. Yeah. So have we got any more questions on to Joe?
I thank the lady. It was very interesting.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Joe.
One thing that did amuse.
I couldn't quite read it all because the screen's too small. But,
You can see
Another thing that amused me was Joe started off by saying that Burbage was one of those places where armies marched through. Well,
yes.
before when we had to move to Leicestershire 33 years ago, I thought, oh, not Leicestershire. It's one of them places you drive through on the way to London.
And never stop.
Flat, boring, uninteresting. But of course, after 33 years, I found a lot more interesting than where I lived before, really. Yeah.
Sylvia's like us. She's a UFO. UFL.
Up from London.
UFL. Up from London.
I shan't sleep tonight now because it's given me so much to think about.
Actually, just on the idea of, I think, unfortunately, because Leicestershire, it got raised by the Normans, because it literally is the centre of England. And unfortunately now you're getting completely swamped by this freight terminal.
Oh, yeah. Don't mention that.
Because you're so central again. It's always played its part, hasn't it?
Yeah.
They're going to go ahead with that, the freight terminal.
Yeah, we've got the Golden Triangle.
That's Paul.
Not if I have my way.
Many of us have our way.
Crane has left.
Should we dig a ditch?
Dig a ditch.
I'm going to see if they're still growing some of that hemp round the back of the graveyard around that way. Some wacky backy to keep us going a little bit longer.
Empty, if that's what you want.
Joe, can I say I found it really interesting.
Thank you.
But there was too much information for me to capture. So I just want to say to everybody, you can view it back on YouTube. And that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Going to watch it
Put it on
again.
the telly then and see it.
Of course, when the book's published.
Yes, well, the book I've finished all. It's a case of putting it together. What I really need is, this is a plug, is some help with publishing it. And then we can do it.
Right, well, we've got a committee meeting end of the month. So I'll talk to you before and then we'll talk to the committee.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for a lovely talk.
Oh, thank you. I'm so pleased that you liked it.
Thanks, Joe.
Very much so.
Yes, that's good.
All right. So if you want to put me down for the Stuarts, I'll do that.
Yes. From Lady Anne and Lord Robert.
Oh, yes.
You're having a fight, are you?
A lovely way to spend an evening.
I'm going to fill my tights with some stones.
Oh,
Wow.
Jeff, watch out.
Join you.
Jeff, watch out.